Hello, 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 everybody. How are you? Listen, it is a Monday night, and this week I want to talk a little bit about mental health. For those of you who don't know, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. May is always Mental Health Awareness Month, and this week for my podcast, I wanted to take some time just to talk about the importance of us taking care of ourselves. Listen, one thing that I know mental health is the buzzword now, and we are all focused on, many of us are focused on taking care of ourselves and making sure. Or pursuing a life of balance, a life of boundaries, and all those things that prevent us from being burned out, or all of those things that prevent us from not experiencing optimum wholeness. But one of the things that I want to talk about tonight is the importance of always giving ourselves a tune up as it relates to how we function on a daily basis. For those of us, that are very familiar with mental health, and we're very familiar with how we operate in terms of emotionally and mentally, we understand that there are things that we need to do within ourselves to ensure that we are okay. And I want to take some time today or this evening. I'm not definitely not going to be before you guys long, but I wanted to stop by this week, in as I think of Mental Health Awareness Month, talking about the importance of tuning up. It is so important that we recognize what our body, our mind, and our spirit needs. For those of you who don't know, I am a therapist, been in practice for many years, been in the field of social work for now 30 years. And one of the things that I understand so well now is that we have to learn ourselves enough to know just what we need as it relates to a tune up. And we can't always leave that responsibility to someone else. And what do I mean by that? Physically, when we go to the doctor to get our annual checkups, whether it's men or women, we go and they have a prescribed way that they examine us, and there are specific things that they look for in this when we are in this examination room, right? And so we understand that just as well as that is the case in the natural, when we start talking about our emotional and mental health, it's important for us to be able to understand what we need to do individually to examine ourselves. So we're talking about tuning up in remembrance of Mental Health Awareness Month. I just wanted to come by tonight just to talk about the importance of tuning up. Okay. Now, when we think about how we tune ourselves up, it's important for us to know what to examine, right? We need to begin to examine, the things in our lives that promotes a healthy mental health, or that promotes a negative, mental health experience. And so it's so important for us to understand that what in your life is an indicator that you are not taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally. I want you to think about that. We are talking about tuning up. We are talking about tuning up as we are in Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I want you to begin to think about, what is it that I need? How do I know whether or not I'm doing well mentally and emotionally? For our physical body, we experience physical symptoms. But when it comes to emotionally and mentally, how do you as an individual know when there is some things that your mental and your emotional needs? Now, I said that a few times, and then I said individually, because it's important for us to understand that every individual, there are some basic needs that we all have, but then there are things that individually we can benefit from that are unique to our personalities. And also, it's unique to where we are in life. When it comes to tuning up, what was helpful in my tune up 20 years ago may have evolved, and it may require more or it may require less. And that's why it's so important for us to always be on a journey of getting to know ourselves. So, one of the things that I want to talk about, and I talk so often about in my practice, as it relates to how to take care of our good mental, how to take care of our mental health as it relates to wholeness, is understanding the key necessities to preserving our energy and our mental health, right? And so I'll say mental health and energy is synonymous right now, right? Because we're not going to talk about energy and all that other stuff. It's, specifically mental health, which involves our emotional and our mental state. Now, one of the things that it is important for us to understand is that we always have to be willing, right, and be cognizant of our lens, right? What I say about lens, and I talk to those that I serve in my practice so often about this, the way that we see things is so key as it relates to mental health. Many of us, we have a lens that is jaded with negative experiences. We have a lens that's jaded with wounds and distrust, and maybe painful experiences of our past, and it prevents us from seeing the positive. It prevents us from being able to look at things from various perspectives. One of the things that is important for us to understand as it relates to lens is our lens determines our direction. And we don't often see things that way, but the way we see a matter, whether it is a relationship matter, whether it is our pursuits, be spiritual, be professional, be personal, the way we see things, it determines our direction. And so it's important for us to understand that, because we have to begin to clear our lens. And oftentimes that tune up, we know that a tune up is required when we have a difficult time seeing things from a higher perspective or from a more positive perspective. And so oftentimes what we have to begin to do is cleanse our lens. We have to begin to deal with the deep rooted issues that causes jaded lenses, or those experiences. We have to begin to release them, that causes us to look at things in negative ways, right? Another thing that our lens does is it oftentimes creates divisiveness in our relationships, because we'll often interpret and see things negatively that doesn't necessarily have to be negative, right? And so we have to be careful that our lens is not tainted, and that we are not assuming that something is bad when it could really be good. Does that make sense? Like oftentimes it's the way that we see things, it's the way that we look at things that determines our direction. And so that's the point, the first thing that I want to, really convey. When we start talking about dealing with our mental health, when we start talking about receiving a tune up, it's important for us to change our lens and begin to see things differently. We have to set an intention in our lives to take the negativity, to remove the negativity from our sight. because we can get stuck in a place of always seeing things in a negative way. And I want you to think about it. How often do you hear something and you automatically perceive it as negative when it's really not? How many of you have had that experience where it's almost like you hear something and you automatically see and believe that that person is doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying because of something negative? And we often, when our lens is tainted, we often experience paranoia. We often experience being assumptive and presumptive, where we automatically accuse people of attempting to attack us and assassinate our character or come for us, when that doesn't necessarily have to be the fact or the case. And so it's important for us to understand that one of the ways to preserve our mental health is to begin to cleanse our lens. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to talk about is the importance of changing our language. So we're talking about cleansing our lens, but then we're talking about changing our language. And this is something that, I mean, if I see 5 or 6 people a day, probably 5 of them, this is what we're talking about in therapy, because it is clear from a biblical standpoint and also from a psychological standpoint. It is clear that what we see is what we say, and what we say will be created in our lives. And so we talked about lens, and now let's say we have to be careful about what we say about ourselves and about other people. Sometimes we say words like never, always. We use these words a lot in our marriages, right? And those words are so finite. They're so hopeless, because it almost makes you believe that God doesn't have the ability to change a situation. Why? Because you're looking at what you're going through in that moment. And so it's important for us to look at, really begin to look at our language and what we say to ourselves, about our situations, and also about other people. It is, when we start talking about preserving our mental health and making sure that we are in a place where we are positive and we are full of joy and full of life, we have to learn how to take our mouths off of people. We have to learn how to be very careful about what we say. In one of the things that in prayer the other day, I began to pray that scripture where it says, let no corrupt communication proceedeth out of your mouth, but only that which is edifying. And I begin to pray, God, help me to edify. Help me to speak to edify your people and not to tear them down, and not to bring negativity into an environment. And so I just believe that when we're talking about tuning up, when we're talking about being careful that we are preserving our mental health, it is so important for us to make sure that we keep our mouths off of people. The other thing is, sometimes the conflict that you pursue is not necessary. There are times when it's better to say nothing than it is to engage in a verbal confrontation with someone. Why? Because at the end of the day, how does it benefit you or the other person? One of the things that I always gauge when I am dealing with conflict, when I am addressing conflict, is I have to think about, what is it worth to me and them? In the grand scheme of things, do I really care about this, and what comes out of this? Okay. Now, whether this is godly or whether it's not, it's about me protecting my mental health and also being very careful of what I say out of my mouth in the midst of conflict. Because in the midst of that conflict, I have to think about what is the goal of that conversation? What is the goal of that conflict? Is the goal to be right or wrong, or is the goal to preserve the relationship? Is the goal to cut you with my tongue, or is the goal to convey love and to come to an understanding? And oftentimes when we are engaged in conflict, it's all about being right, and it's all about you expressing how you felt and what you meant, as opposed to coming to a resolve to preserve the relationship. So in those matters, we have to be careful as it relates to our language. We have to be careful as it relates to, how far are we going to go with this, when we're talking about conflict. And so we've already talked about the importance of cleansing your lens. We're talking about the importance of your language, and making sure that your language is appropriate, and it's conducive to positivity and not negativity, right? And so it's important for us to understand that. So we have lens and language. And I think, the other thing is, it's so important for us to be intentional about laughter, and to be intentional about love, and experiencing lightheartedness throughout our days. If you are going through something very difficult, if there are challenges in your life, you have to be intentional about finding joy in those situations, or finding joy despite those situations. Because at the end of the day, what you see and what you say and what you experience will determine your condition in that time. And so it's important for you, to really begin to look at those things. I believe that there are times when we find ourselves in so much pain, we find ourselves stuck and unable to grasp these concepts. And it's not because we can't, but oftentimes we choose to stay in the state that we in, because we find more comfort in that, as opposed to, sacrificing that. We're talking about a tune up. We're talking about cleansing our lens, being able to, to really look at our language, and how we speak to ourselves and others, and how we engage in conflict or in disagreements, and whether or not we attempt to preserve relationships. And then we're talking about experiencing love and laughter. Sometimes our conflict is not worth the love. It's not worth sacrificing the love in the relationship. Sometimes our disagreements, our being disgruntled, is not worth the sacrifice of laughter and joy. And so we have to begin to look at what's more important in my life now. When we think about that joy part, when we are going through, and we're not always going to experience happiness all the time, but we do understand that happiness is a choice. We do understand that you can choose to be happy, but if you live life long enough, no, we're not going to experience happiness all the time. But there is a choice in the matter as it relates to how we allow ourselves to experience the joy, the laughter, and the love throughout our journey. Oftentimes, we don't know how to do this when we're experiencing pain, right? And so we need helping professionals, whether it's clergy, or whether it's licensed therapists or psychologists, or psychiatrists. We oftentimes need some assistance to get to that point where we are able to transition in our language, or transition in the way we see things in our lens, or we may need assistance as it relates to love, and being able to laugh and see the bright side even in dark situations. All of these things may take the help of a therapist or a counselor, but it's important for us to be intentional about seeing those things. One of the ways that I know that I need a tune up is when my lens shifts. Okay. And I talked about that before in terms of we all have to understand ourselves enough to know when we need what we need. And I can say when my lens shifts, that is an indicator to me that there's some work that I need to do with myself mentally and emotionally. And let me clarify what I mean about when my lens shift. I am naturally the kind of person that will not go, and this is now at this in this phase in my life, I do not think the worst first. I do not. I do not do that. The other thing is, I don't engage in conflict unless I have to, right? I don't belabor conversations and maybe difficult, difficult interactions with people for long periods of time. I just don't do it. I choose to let things go. I choose to address things, and there are some things that I will not address. Okay. There are some things that I simply have chosen to no longer have energy for, and I'm good with that. I am good. But when I need a tune up, here's what, and this is from my experience. When I need a tune up, guess what happens? I look at those very same situations that I've just described that I no longer engage in. I look a little closer into them. And that's when I know that I need a tune up. That's when I know that I need to work on me mentally and emotionally, because I have lost focus and I've become distracted. Even if my distraction has everything to do with where I am emotionally. That's my experience. What is your experience? When do you know that you need a tune up? Okay, that is something that we need to know about ourselves. So I talked about lens. I look at things longer and I put more time into things that normally I wouldn't. Why? Because I'm a little off and I need to go into prayer. Maybe I need some time. Maybe I need to let go of some things that I am holding on to. Maybe I'm stuck at different places where I was disappointed, or whether I was discouraged. And so those are things that I need to tend to. Does that make sense? And every one of us has them, and there are indicators in our lives, just like it is in our car. We're talking about a tune-up. When that red light comes on, when that check engine light comes on, it could mean a many of things. It could mean you need an oil change. It could mean you need this or you need that. Here's the thing. We have indicators we have emotional and mental indicators. And when those things show up in our lives, we need to go back to the drawing board and begin to know what we need to do to take care of ourselves. Does that make sense? Listen, guys, it is so important for us, to get to that place where we know ourselves enough to get that tune up. If you recognize that, guess what? I'm a little off and I got to kind of go back and spend some time with me to figure out what's going on. Guess what? You need to take off. Whether that's call out or for a sick day, a mental health day, whatever it is, if you are working, then you need to take that time and you need to take care of you. If you are in business for yourself, sometimes you got to sacrifice that money so that you can take care of you. If you need a tune up, you got to stop and tend to whatever matters in your life, emotionally and mentally. It is so important to do it. Why? Because guess what's going to happen? It's going to trickle into your interactions, in your relationships with others. And then people are going to be looking at you like, what's wrong with you? Something's off. I don't know why. Something's off. Now, you know something's off, right? But we have to get to a place in our lives where we don't need people to tell us that something is off, but we need to be honest enough with ourselves to recognize those indicators, right? Just like in the car, recognize that that check engine light is on. So if that check engine light is on, you need to go somewhere and sit down, and you need to tend to whatever it is that you need to tend to. Now, here's the other thing that I want to talk about before I get off tonight. Just as I have shared the importance of us understanding our tune up and being able to check our lens, our language, and our laughter and love, it is so much important for our it is so much more important that we not try to do this for someone else. Did you hear what I said, guys? We have to learn how to leave people alone and let their journey be their journey. Now, am I saying not to give people advice, not to encourage people, not to be there for people, not to pray for people? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is everything that I said in the last 20 minutes, it applies to you and you alone. When you recognize that someone else has a tune up, what it needs is in need of a tune up, it is not your responsibility to give them a tune up. It is their responsibility to carry their load and to do what they need to do. It's also not our responsibility to point out that someone needs a tune up. It is their responsibility. So, what am I saying? We have to mind our own matters. We have to mind our own matters so that we can be healthy enough to show up the way we need to show up in relationships. Okay. It is so important for us to understand that our mental health is our own personal responsibility. And we cannot, only in prayer and through God, can we carry people. Okay. The Bible talks about how, those that are strong will bear the infirmities of the weak. That is, we can do that with the help of the Lord, with the guidance of the Lord. We can intercede. The Bible talks about how, the effectual and fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much. We can avail ourselves in prayer, and we can pray and carry someone on the altar. There are so many scriptures that speaks to us having the ability to help people, gain healing and gain strength, right, in their time of need. And that's in God. And that's allowing the Holy Spirit to work through us. That is not something that we are doing on our own, nor is that for every single body. Because I believe that God will order our steps as it relates to how we show up for people. Okay, so first I started talking about the importance of the tune-up that we need. But then I also am talking about the importance for us understanding that we cannot mind the matters of other people as it relates to their tune-up, but encouraging people and giving people advice when asked. Okay, because as adults we often find ourselves giving advice that wasn't asked for. Okay, if you are in the role of a friend, if you are in the role of someone that you are showing up for support, you ask, right? You ask, or you allow them to give you permission, right? But there are times when we just run in and we start telling people, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that, and that's unfair. Okay, so you want to first and foremost make sure that when you are showing up for people as they are in their need of tune-up, that you're being led of the Lord. You also that you are praying for them, right? And you are praying their strength, right? And if there is advice needed or counsel needed, you are being asked for that counsel or that advice. You are being invited in, because sometimes we just go all the way in and we intrude on other people's spaces. And so it's so important that we understand that there's a way to show up for people. And I believe that the more sensitive we are, as the more sensitive sensitive and the more wise we are as it relates to how to show up for other people, the better we are able to be of a support, be a support of those that we love. Listen, it's all about tuning up. I hope that this was, something that can be helpful to you as you go along your days this month. Remember, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm just talking about a tune-up. Make sure you take care of yourself, and make sure you be intentional about minding your own matters. Listen, God bless you, everyone. Have an amazing week.